The scandal began the moment Lady Eleanor's carriage rattled over the cobblestones of Mayfair, its polished wheels glinting in the waning lantern light. She had arrived late, cheeks flushed with the chill of the November evening, and the murmurs of the assembled crowd struck her like a gale. "She dares appear in such attire," a thin-lipped lady hissed, her jeweled fan trembling with every whispered word. One might think her mother forgot to instruct her in propriety. Eleanor's heart thumped violently, a rapid drumbeat beneath her ribcage, and she clutched her gloves so tightly the leather creased beneath her fingers. Already, the room's judgment had encircled her, tightening like an invisible noose. She stepped from the carriage, the hem of her silver-embroidered gown brushing the cold stones, and felt the pressing weight of eyes upon her. Every glance, every sideways smirk, every faintly audible gasp compounded the sense of exile she had carried since her mother first spoke of advantageous unions. Eleanor had known, of course, that society demanded perfection, a measured smile, the right bow, the correct tempo of laughter, but she had never felt so acutely the sting of their scrutiny. She paused at the threshold, drawing a trembling breath and whispering a silent plea for courage, though she knew courage alone could not shield her from the judgment that hung in the air like smoke from the hearths. From the corner of the grand ballroom, somewhere behind a lattice of gilded mirrors and chandeliers, he watched. The stranger, who moved with a quiet command that belied his youth, observed Eleanor with an intensity that neither sought nor welcomed notice. The Duke of Ashford, though few knew his face, had long observed her from the periphery of society's gatherings, intrigued not merely by her beauty, but by the restless intelligence that stirred in her eyes. Even now, as whispers cascaded like a torrent around her, his gaze remained fixed upon her, unyielding yet tender, as though he alone recognized the heart that thudded audibly beneath her corseted chest. Eleanor drew herself forward, crossing the threshold and stepping into the maelstrom of expectation. The orchestra struck a familiar chord, a swelling waltz that demanded poise, precision, and perfection. She felt her chest tighten with the anticipation of every judgment-laden glance. Mothers evaluated her posture, daughters measured her charm, and gentlemen of station noted her grace, or the lack thereof. Eleanor's foot nearly caught upon the richly woven carpet, and in that fleeting stumble, she sensed the collective exhalation of 100 critical onlookers. Her face warmed, a delicate flush that threatened to betray the turmoil within, and she lifted her chin, forcing her lips into a polite, controlled smile. And then, as if the fates themselves had conspired, a whispered remark floated to her ears, sharp as a whip. "She is far too forward," a lady murmured to her companion, voice dripping with condescension. To think she would laugh so freely with strangers, her family must be desperate. Eleanor's chest tightened further, her hands, gloved and trembling, sought the nearest column for support. The ballroom's chandeliers seemed to dim, their brilliance swallowed by the weight of collective censure. In that moment, she felt the vertigo of exposure, the suffocating gravity of societal expectation pressing upon her with unrelenting force. She wondered, bitterly, whether she might yet vanish into the shadowed corridors and escape the cruel spectacle entirely. The Duke moved, silently bridging the distance that separated observation from intervention. He appeared beside her, unannounced yet unsurprising, as though he had materialized from the very air around her. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, precise baritone that seemed to settle the turbulence in her chest, "might I have the honor of this dance?" There was no flourish, no ostentation, simply the weight of certainty, the quiet gravity of a man accustomed to command. Eleanor, startled into composure, nodded, her lips parting slightly in a breathless acknowledgement. Their hands met, gloved fingers brushing against one another, and in that fleeting contact, the world beyond the ballroom fell away. The whispers persisted, faint and distant now, unable to pierce the bubble of immediate connection. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, not entirely, but with a tremulous, inexplicable thrill. Here was a stranger who defied the murmurs, who ignored the petty judgments and regarded her as though she were the sole inhabitant of the room. Yet the question gnawed at her: who was he? Why did he approach with such assurance, and why did the depth of his gaze unsettle her so? They moved across the floor, their steps synchronized in a dance that demanded attention and precision. Eleanor's mind whirled with confusion and intrigue, for she had never met this man, yet there was a familiarity in the way his hand guided hers, a reassurance in the steady cadence of his movements. Every polite bow, every nuanced gesture of acknowledgement to the surrounding audience, served to highlight the contrast between their composed exterior and the silent tumult that churned beneath Eleanor's ribcage. As the dance drew to a close, Eleanor's curiosity flared, sharp and insistent. Who was this stranger who had so effortlessly commanded her attention, who had stepped into her world with a poise that defied the rigid strictures of society? She dared not ask outright. The eyes of the ballroom remained upon her, ever watchful, ever critical. Yet in the briefest exchange of glances, she sensed a hidden depth, an intelligence, a patience, a longing that mirrored the quiet, secret stirrings of her own heart. And then, as she curtsied with trembling elegance, her eyes caught a slip of parchment, folded neatly and placed upon a silver tray beside the orchestra pit. With a hand that betrayed her inner turmoil, she reached for it. The seal bore no crest she recognized, only the simple, meticulous impression of a pressed flower. Her breath caught, and she tucked the note into her palm, the paper warm against her skin. She dared not open it here, society's eyes were merciless. Yet she felt, in that small, deliberate gesture, the first thread of a connection that promised both peril and enchantment. The orchestra swelled, filling the cavernous space with a crescendo that seemed to echo the rising tension within Eleanor's chest. She bowed once more to the assembled audience, the note concealed in her hand, and felt the ghost of a smile tug at her lips. For a moment, the ballroom's tyranny seemed suspended, yet she knew the shadows of gossip, expectation, and the enigmatic stranger's quiet attention would not be so easily banished. As she withdrew to a quieter corner, heart still thrumming, Eleanor dared a glance at the Duke once more. He remained distant, composed, yet his gaze lingered upon her with a gravity that stirred both apprehension and fascination. The note in her hand seemed to pulse with unspoken promise, a harbinger of revelations yet to come. In the midst of scandal, whispers, and the relentless weight of societal expectation, Eleanor realized she had been thrust into a new orbit, one that might illuminate desires she had yet to name, and fears she had yet to confront. The final candle flickered above the ballroom doors, casting long, wavering shadows upon the polished floor. Eleanor's eyes traced the shape of the stranger across the room, and the note in her hand seemed suddenly heavier, imbued with intent and mystery. She opened it there, heart pounding, and the first words she read, a confession, delicate and precise, took her breath entirely, leaving her poised on the precipice of astonishment. Society's judgment pressed in from all sides, yet in that moment, the scandal, the whispers, and the rigid expectations of propriety mattered not. For the first time, Eleanor understood that a stranger's gaze, and a stranger's words, could ignite both fear and longing in equal measure. And as the ballroom spun around her, she knew that nothing in her carefully ordered life would ever feel the same again. The next morning brought no relief, only the persistent echo of last night's whispers and the weight of society's scrutiny pressing upon Eleanor's chest. She awoke to the chill of her chamber, the linen stiff and unyielding beneath her, and the faint sound of carriages rattling over cobblestones below reminded her that the city waited to judge her anew. Yet it was not the cold walls or the creaking floorboards that troubled her most, but the note that still rested in her gloved hand. Its pressed flower seemed to pulse with a secret heartbeat, as if demanding that she understand its purpose before the day had even begun. Eleanor's heart thrummed violently, a dissonant accompaniment to the silence that had settled upon the room. She dared to read the delicate script once more, tracing the elegant curves of the inked words with trembling fingers. I have admired you from a distance, Lady Eleanor, longer than propriety allows me to speak. Allow me to guide you through this evening. The brevity of the message, so precise and understated, carried a gravity that she could scarcely reconcile. How was it possible, she wondered, that a man she had never spoken to could know her with such careful attention? The question brought both intrigue and fear, and Eleanor found herself standing before the mirror, tracing her own reflection as though she might uncover the answers written there. The day advanced, a series of polite calls and obligatory appearances, yet every movement Eleanor made was shadowed by the anticipation of the evening to come. Her mother, precise and unsympathetic, reminded her incessantly of the need to appear serene, to cultivate charm, and to avoid any conduct that might invite further censure. Eleanor's mind, however, remained half-occupied with the stranger whose gaze had seemed to pierce beyond the fan, beyond the whispers, beyond the carefully constructed facades of polite society. Even the mundane tasks of powdering her hair and adjusting the intricate folds of her gown felt laden with significance, each brushstroke seemed to echo with the possibility of discovery, and each ribbon tied at her waist was a silent plea for composure. It was in the early hours of dusk that she found herself in the garden, ostensibly to seek solace in the crisp air and the scent of frost-tipped roses, yet truly to decipher the intentions of the mysterious Duke. A gentle wind stirred, lifting stray tendrils of hair from her face, and Eleanor allowed herself to breathe, if only briefly, unobserved. The garden, lined with clipped hedges and marble statues, seemed to exist outside the harsh scrutiny of society, a liminal space where propriety softened and possibility emerged. She felt, for the first time that day, a flicker of hope that perhaps not all of the world demanded her subservience. Footsteps approached, careful and deliberate upon the gravel paths, and Eleanor's pulse quickened. He appeared, not with fanfare, but with a quiet inevitability, as though the garden itself had summoned him. The Duke of Ashford, his presence as commanding in daylight as it had been across the ballroom, regarded her with an intensity softened by restrained gentleness. His eyes, dark and fathomless, did not seek to charm nor to command in the conventional manner. Rather, they sought understanding, recognition, acknowledgement of a truth that had long been hidden from all but himself. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing with the measured grace of a man accustomed to command yet respectful of delicate sensibilities. "I hope the day has treated you with a measure of kindness, despite the burdens you bear." The words were simple, almost mundane, yet Eleanor felt the weight of unspoken care beneath them. There was no declaration, no demand, only the promise that he had observed, and that he had chosen to intervene with subtlety and discretion. She inclined her head, a flicker of nervous amusement brushing her lips. "Your concern is noted, sir, though I fear it may be misplaced. The world is generous in its indignities." A faint smile curved his mouth, but his gaze remained steadfast. "Indignities, perhaps," he said softly, "but also opportunities, if one is willing to see beyond the surface. I hope to show you that the world need not be as unkind as it appears." The cadence of his speech, deliberate and tempered, imbued the moment with an intimacy that made Eleanor's breath hitch. She sensed that his words were not idle. They were deliberate markers, subtle yet profound gestures that demanded recognition and reflection. As they walked along the gravel paths, the Duke produced from the folds of his coat a small object, wrapped in the simplest of papers. Eleanor's hand hovered, hesitant, as he extended it toward her. "A token," he said, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "A small offering of esteem, and perhaps a hint of patience for a future we have yet to chart." With trembling fingers, she accepted the parcel, her curiosity battling the lingering caution that society had instilled within her. Inside, she discovered a finely wrought locket, delicate and understated, containing a miniature painting of a single rose in bloom. The artistry, the attention, the very thoughtfulness of the gift, spoke volumes of the care he had taken long before their acquaintance in the ballroom. Eleanor's heart, previously burdened by the suffocating pressures of expectation, felt a flutter of wonder. The gift was at once modest and profound, a quiet rebellion against the judgmental eyes of her peers. In that instant, she recognized that the Duke's attentions were not mere flirtation, nor the shallow gestures of a social aspirant. They were deliberate, considered, and imbued with a patient devotion that had endured for years in silence. The realization both thrilled and unnerved her, for the notion of being observed, understood, and cherished by a stranger was as intoxicating as it was frightening. Conversation between them unfolded with careful precision. Every word, every pause, carried layers of meaning. Eleanor found herself laughing softly at the subtle wit embedded in his observations, noting how his attentions were never intrusive, but persistently attuned to her sensibilities. For the first time, she sensed a presence that did not demand compliance, nor attempt to reshape her according to society's narrow dictates. He listened, observed, and responded with a deftness that left her both comforted and disquieted, the tension of curiosity mingling with the thrill of anticipation. As dusk deepened into evening, the garden's shadows lengthened, and the crisp air carried a faint scent of frost-kissed blooms. Eleanor's mind raced, oscillating between caution and desire, between wonder and fear. The Duke's patience, his subtle attentions, his unspoken knowledge of her character, all coalesced into an overwhelming sense of inevitability. She could not yet name the precise nature of her feelings, nor determine whether they were of affection, intrigue, or the heady rush of admiration reciprocated. Yet she understood, with an unerring clarity, that her life had been irrevocably altered by the appearance of this man, whose devotion had quietly followed her across countless social events, unnoticed by all but the keenest eyes. And then, as they reached the far end of the garden, the Duke paused, allowing the night to envelop them. He regarded her, not with expectation, but with a deliberate stillness that seemed to hold the world at bay. "There are truths," he murmured, voice rich and restrained, "that cannot be spoken amidst the scrutiny of others. But you shall know them, in time, if you are willing to trust." Eleanor's breath caught, the pulse of her heart echoing the tension that hung between them. She had glimpsed devotion, patience, and a sincerity that society's glare had long obscured. Yet the question remained, delicate and insistent: could she allow herself to trust a stranger, whose care had shadowed her life in silence, unseen and unacknowledged? The chill of evening deepened, and Eleanor felt the weight of the locket against her chest, a tangible reminder of promises unspoken and attentions unfaltering. As she gazed upon the Duke, his dark eyes fixed upon hers, a shiver of anticipation ran through her, mingling with fear and fascination. The garden, once a refuge, now seemed a threshold, an invitation into a realm where scandal, society, and propriety might yet yield to the quiet insistence of patient love. And as the first stars shimmered above, Eleanor realized that the world she had known, structured and unforgiving, had been irrevocably altered by a single act of observation, a single token of devotion. The question lingered, delicate yet insistent: pressing upon her consciousness. Could a stranger's unwavering attention become the foundation of a life she had yet to imagine, and would she dare step into the unknown that beckoned so insistently? The night seemed to hold its breath, and Eleanor, heart trembling, felt that the next choice she made would determine not merely her reputation, but the very course of her heart. The storm broke without warning, rattling the windows of Ashford Manor with a ferocity that mirrored the turmoil in Eleanor's heart. Rain pelted the slate roof and sloshed against the stone terraces, yet she could not move from the hearth where the Duke had left her, a presence both grounding and unsettling. The firelight flickered against the high mantel, casting elongated shadows across the room, shadows that seemed to echo the unspoken tensions between them. Eleanor's pulse thundered as the realization settled with the weight of inevitability. This man, this enigmatic observer who had silently marked her life, was no longer distant. He was near, and his presence demanded a reckoning she had long avoided. The Duke appeared at the doorway, framed by the darkened hall and the relentless cascade of rain, his coat still damp, hair tousled yet impeccably composed. "Lady Eleanor," he said, voice calm yet resonant, "the storm makes it impossible to attend the evening's engagements. I trust you will pardon this intrusion." The words were simple, measured, yet Eleanor felt their underlying gravity. It was not a request, nor a mere statement of circumstance, it was an invitation into the private sphere he rarely allowed any to enter. The familiar intensity in his gaze held her captive, and she realized that the storm outside was but a mirror of the tempest within her own breast. Her hand, half hidden beneath the folds of her gown, clutched the locket he had given her in the garden. The miniature rose seemed almost to pulse in time with her heartbeat, a tangible reminder of the patient devotion he had shown, and of the precarious precipice upon which she now stood. Eleanor's voice, when it emerged, was careful, deliberate, yet betraying a tremor she could not conceal. "You have watched me, from afar, for years. How is it possible that I know so little of you, yet feel that I have always known this gaze?" Her words, though polite and measured, carried the weight of longing and accusation, intertwining in a delicate tension that left neither of them untouched. The Duke stepped closer, the faint scent of cedar and rain clinging to him, a natural magnetism that both unsettled and soothed. "I have known your heart, Lady Eleanor, in ways that society cannot comprehend," he murmured, each syllable deliberate, each word a tender probe into the recesses of her guarded self. "I have observed your triumphs, your trials, your smallest gestures, and all have spoken to a truth that I dared not reveal until this very hour." His hands, gloved yet commanding, rested lightly upon the back of a nearby chair, the subtle positioning a careful balance of restraint and control. Eleanor's chest tightened, an exquisite ache of anticipation, for in those restrained movements lay a revelation more potent than any declaration. She moved closer, drawn not by mere curiosity, but by the magnetic certainty that he had long been the silent axis of her social world. "And what truth is that?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, yet carrying the tremor of her inner apprehension. The Duke's lips curved faintly, not with triumph, but with a quiet reverence for the vulnerability she had laid bare. "That you are cherished," he said simply, and the room seemed to still around them. Cherished in ways that no observation, no token, no whispered warning could ever convey to the careless eye. "My devotion has endured, patiently, from a distance, and now I hope it might be accepted at close quarters." Eleanor's mind whirled. The garden, the note, the subtle attentions, all crystallized into an unbroken chain of care and unspoken affection. And yet, fear shadowed her wonder. To accept such devotion from a stranger, even one whose patience had long preceded acquaintance, was to risk the collapse of the careful walls she had built against society's relentless scrutiny. Every instinct demanded caution, every heartbeat whispered desire. She inhaled sharply, eyes lifting to meet the intensity in his, and in that gaze she saw the reflection of her own trembling curiosity. The Duke removed a single glove, a subtle but deliberate act, and extended his hand toward her. "I do not presume, Lady Eleanor, to demand your trust," he said, voice soft, measured, yet insistent. "I offer only the certainty of my regard and the patience of my years." The gesture was both ordinary and extraordinary, a quiet declaration that carried more weight than any grandiose pronouncement. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she accepted the hand, and in that contact, brief yet electrifying, she felt the spark of a connection that had been silently burning for countless seasons. They spoke then, in hushed tones, of trivialities and manners at first, yet every word bore layers of intent and unspoken acknowledgement. Eleanor found herself laughing softly at his understated wit, and each smile, each carefully modulated glance, deepened the intimate rhythm between them. The storm outside seemed distant now, merely a backdrop to the quiet tempest of longing and discovery within the room. She felt herself opening in ways she had never permitted, her thoughts no longer confined to propriety or fear, but daring to wander toward possibility and desire. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting flames of the hearth and the relentless drum of rain. Eleanor's heart, previously encased in caution, began to pulse with anticipation that was almost physical in its intensity. The Duke spoke little of the social world, no mention of gossip or obligation. He spoke instead of the quiet constancy of observation, of the silent admiration that had never sought reward or recognition. Each phrase, deliberate and restrained, revealed a patience that both humbled and thrilled her. The realization struck with sudden force: this stranger, who had watched from shadows, now occupied the very center of her world. And then, with deliberate calm, he produced from the folds of his coat a folded sheet of vellum, sealed with a wax impression of the Ashford crest. "I have written for you," he said simply, "a confession of what cannot be spoken aloud in polite society. Read when you are prepared, and know that it is offered with nothing but sincerity." Eleanor accepted the parchment with hands that trembled and heart that raced. She unfolded it, reading line after line of careful, precise acknowledgment of admiration, longing, and patient devotion. The words, elegant and restrained, carried the weight of years and the clarity of intention, striking her with a force that left her breathless. Tears pricked her eyes, though she did not shed them, for pride and propriety demanded restraint even in solitude. The truth she had longed for, feared, and yet secretly anticipated was now laid bare before her. The Duke had loved her, patiently, unobservedly, and unwaveringly. The room seemed to hum with the gravity of revelation, a quiet intimacy that neither required nor permitted intrusion. Eleanor's pulse slowed, replaced by a fragile, tender wonder that both excited and unsettled her. Yet even in this revelation, fear persisted. To embrace such devotion was to risk everything: reputation, propriety, the fragile scaffolding of a life built upon careful expectation. Could she trust a man she scarcely knew, whose devotion had been veiled in silence until this perfect moment? The tension coiled in her chest, exquisite and sharp, a question unanswered, a desire unmet, a future uncertain. And as the storm outside began to wane, leaving a faint scent of wet earth and crushed petals in its wake, Eleanor folded the letter carefully and gazed at the Duke, his presence now impossibly close and impossibly vital. The locket rested against her heart, a tangible reminder of his care, and in that moment, she understood that the path ahead was neither simple nor safe, but irresistible. Her eyes met his, and the unspoken question hung in the room like the last flicker of lightning. Would she dare to let her heart step fully into the devotion that had long awaited her, unseen, untested, and infinitely patient? The wedding bells had scarcely faded when the shadows of the evening pressed upon Eleanor's chamber, heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. The day had been a whirlwind of polite congratulations, veiled glances, and careful etiquette, yet now, alone in the quiet sanctum of Ashford Manor, she felt the full weight of what she had agreed to: a union with a stranger, whose devotion she had glimpsed only in fragments, yet whose presence now loomed over her like an inevitable tide. The candlelight flickered across the polished walls, casting delicate reflections that danced in time with her unsteady pulse. Eleanor's hand rested upon the locket the Duke had given her, its weight both grounding and electric, a tangible reminder that the man she had been drawn to from afar was now bound to her by vows spoken under the watchful eyes of a scrutinizing society. A sharp knock broke the tense silence, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The Duke entered without ceremony, the faint rustle of his coat announcing his arrival before she had fully recovered from the shock. His eyes, dark and fathomless, held a gravity that seemed to absorb the very light in the room. "Lady Eleanor," he said, voice low and steady, "the world outside has completed its judgments. Here, in this chamber, you shall know only truth and sincerity." The simplicity of the statement, its unassuming authority, sent a shiver through her, a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and longing that left her unmoored from all prior certainties. She rose to meet him, every movement measured yet trembling with an awareness of the moment's magnitude. Her voice faltered, caught between the remnants of polite restraint and the undeniable pull of curiosity. The Duke stepped closer, the air between them charged with a quiet intensity that was almost tactile. "No words are required, Lady Eleanor," he said, "only the openness of the heart, which I have long admired in silence." His gloved hand rested lightly upon a chair back, and in that deliberate restraint, he conveyed more than any ornate declaration could, signaling patience, respect, and an unspoken promise of care. Eleanor clutched the locket once more, feeling the small rose press against her palm. It was a symbol, she realized, of the continuity of his devotion, a devotion that had endured across countless balls, social gatherings, and whispered judgments, all unseen and unacknowledged. Her breath quickened, and yet, beneath the thrill, a tremor of apprehension persisted. Could she trust a man whose love had remained veiled for so long, whose attentions had been patient and hidden, yet now demanded her surrender in a single, profound moment? The question hovered between them, unspoken but insistent, as if the very walls of the chamber anticipated the delicate negotiation of hearts about to unfold. The Duke moved slightly, producing a small velvet box from the folds of his coat. He placed it upon the mantel with deliberate care, a gesture that seemed both ceremonial and intimate. Eleanor approached cautiously, her curiosity overcoming hesitation, and opened the box to reveal a delicate ring, modest yet exquisitely wrought. Its simplicity contrasted with the grandeur of the manor, yet its significance was immense, a symbol of fidelity, devotion, and the patience that had defined their silent acquaintance. She looked up, meeting the Duke's gaze, and understood that this was not merely a token, but a pledge, tender and irrevocable, offered without expectation, yet heavy with meaning. "I have watched, and I have waited," he said, his voice low, deliberate, and resonant. "I have seen your struggles with expectation, your battles with propriety, your courage in small, quiet moments that no one else could recognize. All of it has been a testament to the woman I long admired from afar. Tonight, I only wish for you to know the truth of my heart." Eleanor's chest ached with a mixture of wonder and fear. The words were simple, yet they carried the cumulative weight of years and observation, a revelation so intimate that it left her breathless. She reached for his hand, tentative yet resolved, feeling the warmth beneath his glove. The contact was brief, a mere brush of fingers, yet in it was the promise of patience, respect, and unwavering devotion. Eleanor's mind raced, remembering the garden, the note, the subtle gifts, and now this pledge. The constancy of his attentions, the careful observation, and the deliberate restraint all coalesced into a force that was at once exhilarating and frightening. She realized, in that moment, that this stranger, now husband, had known her in ways that society could not, and that the heart he revealed to her was a sanctuary against the relentless judgments of the world. They spoke then in measured tones, sharing reflections, confessions, and silences filled with meaning. Eleanor found herself laughing softly at the gentle humor embedded in his observations, a delicate balance of wit and gravity that left her senses alight. Every pause, every carefully chosen word, carried layers of intent, a rhythm that drew them closer without demanding, without forcing. The intimacy of the dialogue, the shared understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement of patience and devotion created a resonance that neither had anticipated but both recognized as profound. The night deepened, shadows lengthening across the polished floor, and Eleanor felt the weight of her previous fears lifting, replaced by a tender curiosity and cautious hope. She traced the contours of the locket against her palm, a tangible connection to the care that had long preceded their union. The Duke, observing her silently, offered no intrusion, no grand gestures, only presence, a steadfast, patient, and attentive presence that seemed to anchor the storm of her emotions. In that stillness, Eleanor recognized the profound distinction between perfunctory love and the enduring devotion that had quietly threaded itself through their lives until this night. At last, the Duke approached, kneeling briefly to adjust a ribbon at her gown with the care of a man attentive to minutiae, yet imbued with tenderness. Eleanor's breath caught, a mixture of emotion and anticipation, for she understood that the gestures, though subtle, carried the eloquence of a declaration that no words could entirely encompass. She met his gaze, dark and earnest, and felt the quiet pulse of something extraordinary, an acknowledgement that she had been seen, appreciated, and cherished beyond the confines of societal expectation. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, casting a pale luminescence across the chamber, Eleanor realized that her life had shifted irrevocably. The storm outside had subsided, leaving only the fragile serenity of wet earth and hushed anticipation. She understood now that the Duke's devotion, once distant and enigmatic, had transformed into a tangible, living presence within her own sphere. Yet even in this revelation, uncertainty lingered, a delicate tension between the exhilaration of discovery and the caution demanded by propriety and circumstance. And then, as she placed the locket close to her heart and turned to meet his eyes once more, Eleanor felt a whisper of inevitability in the air. The storm had passed, but the pulse of their connection, patient and unwavering, beckoned her forward into uncharted territory. The promise of devotion, the weight of hidden admiration, and the thrill of discovery hung suspended between them, as fragile and electric as the first light of dawn. And in that suspended moment, Eleanor knew that the night had revealed more than love, it had unveiled the profound truth that her heart's desires, long buried beneath expectation and fear, might finally be claimed, if she dared to accept them fully. The carriage wheels rattled violently against the rain-slicked streets of London, an unrelenting rhythm that echoed the beating of Eleanor's heart. News had arrived of an unexpected scandal, an accusation against a family acquaintance whose duplicity threatened to tarnish not only her name but the fragile reputation she had begun to claim. The city's whispers had grown louder, sharper, more insistent, and Eleanor felt the weight of expectation pressing against her chest with renewed force. Yet she no longer faced it alone. At her side, the Duke of Ashford remained calm, composed, and unyielding, a steady presence against the roar of judgment and uncertainty. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within, rain lashing against the windows, thunder cracking overhead as if heralding a confrontation not only of society's scrutiny but of Eleanor's own anxieties. She grasped the Duke's hand, feeling the warmth and solidity that had become her anchor. "We cannot allow rumor to dictate our lives," he murmured, voice rich and resolute. "Together, we shall face what is inevitable, with dignity, and with truth as our shield." Eleanor inhaled, drawing courage from his presence. In his gaze, dark and unwavering, she recognized the unspoken promise of protection, devotion, and unwavering patience. The fear that had once threatened to paralyze her seemed to shrink beneath the magnitude of their shared resolve. They entered the grand hall of Ashford Manor, where servants moved quietly, acknowledging the weight of tension in the air. Eleanor's gown, the soft silver of dawn itself, shimmered faintly beneath the candlelight, and the Duke's attire, impeccable and understated, spoke of authority and care rather than ostentation. Whispers followed them as they passed, household staff and distant relatives sensing a change, though unable to name it. Eleanor felt a flutter of defiance. She had been observed, judged, and criticized for years, yet the presence of the Duke transformed the scrutiny into a shared responsibility, a battleground where their unity might turn judgment into admiration. The scandal that awaited was minor in comparison to what she had endured internally, yet it demanded confrontation. Letters of accusation, bearing claims of impropriety and improvident conduct, were laid upon the table before her. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but the Duke's hand upon her back steadied her. "Read them," he said softly, voice low enough to bypass the room's murmurs. "And remember that truth, patience, and integrity will always outweigh hearsay." Eleanor opened the first envelope, her fingers trembling, and the words blurred beneath her initial shock. Yet as she read on, she recognized the exaggerations and fabrications for what they were, insignificant against the steadfast character she had cultivated, and the devotion of the man who now stood unwaveringly at her side. Her gaze lifted to meet his, and she saw not only encouragement but a quiet assertion that she was valued, respected, and cherished beyond the confines of rumor or society's capricious judgment. A soft, unspoken understanding passed between them. The Duke had long observed her grace under pressure, her measured restraint in the face of insult, and now he stood ready to confront the scandal not as a distant observer but as a partner, equal in both defense and resolve. Eleanor felt a surge of warmth, her confidence bolstered not by vanity, but by the profound knowledge that devotion could transform fear into courage. The hours passed as they addressed the accusations with calm and measured replies, each interaction a testament to their composure and unity. Eleanor discovered that the Duke's attentiveness was not merely ceremonial. He anticipated each rebuttal, each subtle insinuation, providing clarity and guidance without diminishing her agency. She felt a growing admiration for the depth of his understanding, the steadiness of his patience, and the quiet strength of a man whose love had been cultivated in silence yet emerged now with deliberate precision. Each exchanged glance, each subtle smile, reinforced the connection that had grown from observation, to gesture, to confession, and now to shared purpose. Even as the scandal began to dissipate under their careful attention, the emotional landscape of the day demanded further reckoning. Eleanor realized that the Duke's devotion had not only provided security but also a mirror, reflecting the courage she had often failed to acknowledge within herself. The locket against her chest felt heavier with meaning now, not merely a symbol of affection but a token of partnership, respect, and shared resolve. Every glance toward him, every subtle brush of the hand, carried an intimacy born of trust, patience, and mutual recognition. The Duke led her to a quiet chamber, distant from the household's lingering eyes. "Tonight," he said, voice low and deliberate, "we leave the judgment of others behind. Here, you may know the truth of my heart entirely, without the interference of society." Eleanor's chest fluttered, a mixture of anticipation and nervous excitement, for she understood that this moment was both culmination and beginning. The small gestures, the letters, the patient attentions, had all led to this private revelation, a recognition of devotion and sincerity that demanded acknowledgement. He knelt briefly, offering her hand with a reverence that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "I have loved you quietly, fully, and without expectation, for longer than propriety allowed me speech. Tonight, I offer not mere words, but my presence, my attention, and the promise that I shall never seek to control, but only to cherish." Her fingers brushed against his, the connection electric yet delicate, a bridge between past patience and future possibility. Eleanor's breath caught, and tears threatened, for she realized that love, observed and measured, could be more profound than any impulse or passion displayed for the world. They spoke then of hopes, fears, and desires, each word chosen with care, each pause loaded with intent. Eleanor discovered that the Duke's affection was neither shallow nor fleeting, it was deliberate, sustained, and profound. She felt the layers of her own defenses begin to unravel, revealing a heart capable of trust, admiration, and eventual surrender. Every small gesture, every subtle acknowledgement of her presence and worth, deepened the intimacy, creating a rhythm both private and profound. The storm outside had passed entirely, leaving only the quiet resonance of hearts attuned to one another. As midnight approached, Eleanor placed the locket once more against her chest, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had led to this point, from distant observation, to subtle gifts, to confessions and private attentions, culminating now in a shared understanding that transcended rumor, expectation, and fear. The Duke observed her, dark eyes luminous with the intensity of unwavering devotion, and Eleanor understood that this night would be remembered not for scandal, nor for social expectation, but for the quiet, profound recognition of love nurtured in patience, respect, and fidelity. And yet, even as dawn hinted at the horizon, casting a soft glow upon the manor, Eleanor sensed a lingering tension, a delicate anticipation of what the coming days might hold. The scandal was vanquished, their unity established, and their hearts aligned, yet the world beyond the manor remained as unpredictable and challenging as ever. Eleanor understood that devotion, though profound, required constant attention, careful tending, and courage to maintain amidst the relentless judgments of society. She glanced at the Duke, his presence steady and reassuring, and felt a thrill of wonder. The path ahead was uncertain, yet shared, and the possibilities of devotion, discovery, and mutual understanding were limitless. As she folded the locket, heart steady yet alight with emotion, Eleanor realized that she had crossed a threshold. The Duke's patient love had become a guiding light, illuminating both her own capacity for trust and the promise of a life shared in quiet, profound intimacy. And in that suspended moment, with the first rays of sunlight brushing the horizon, Eleanor's gaze met his, and the unspoken question remained, delicate yet insistent: would the devotion that had patiently awaited her from afar continue to guide them through the uncharted tides of the world beyond, or would society's next storm test the strength of hearts now irrevocably intertwined?